Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Thanks for joining me for another of our Torah studies. This is an exciting day to do it because this is the very first Torah portion. We had Simchat Torah last week, which means that we're done with Torah. And when you're done with Torah, just do it again because there's always stuff to find out. So we're going to start off with, we're going to take our news, put it off to the side, maybe for the whole of Shabbat, maybe just for these 10 minutes. I've got my kippot, and I found my baseball kippah, so I'm going to put that on, even though the World Series is over and the Red Sox weren't even close to being in it, but whatever, it's still on my mind. We've got our Tanakh. I gotta remember to lift stuff up. It's been a long time since I did one of these regular videos. We've had so many holidays. All right, before we read, we say our blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai our God, sovereign of the universe, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to engage with the words of Torah. So, we've got the very first Parsha, and it is, I always think it's weird to read the very first. It's like beginning a book. This is, where's the end of the Torah? There it is. We had been reading all the way here. Not quite even in the middle. There's a lot of the Old Testament. But we're going to start here. You've probably heard some of this before. I'm sure you have, actually. So I'm not even going to read the whole thing. I'm just going to kind of skip around. In the beginning, when God began to create heaven and earth, the earth being unformed and void, with darkness over the surface of the deep, and a wind from God sweeping over the water, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness God called night. There was evening, and there was morning, the first day. Now we're going to skip to the end of this, the end of the 6 days of creation. Sometimes we say 7 days. I like to say 6 days of creation because it's 6 days to create, and then Shabbat is the seventh day. There's no creation then. Anyway, God said, "Let the earth bring forth every kind of living creature, cattle, creeping things, and wild beasts of every kind." And it was so. God made wild beasts of every kind, and cattle of every kind, and all kinds of creeping things on the earth. And God saw that this was good. And God said, "Let us make humans in our image, after our likeness. They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, and all the creeping things that creep on the earth." And God created humans in God's image. In the image of God they were created, male and female. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fertile and increase, fill the earth and master it, and rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and all the living things that creep on the earth." So what I want to talk about, of course, is when God's creating, God isn't using hands. Whether God even has hands is a whole different conversation to have. But God creates things by saying it. By saying, "Let there be light," and there was light. "Let there be people," and there were people. Let there be creeping things, and there were creeping things. And so there's a lot of power in God's voice, which makes sense. It's God. God's omnipotent. There's a lot of power involved in that. God can do things that we can't. However, it also said that God creates humans in God's own image. And so humans are, in some way, it's not totally clear how, but humans are like God. And I think one of the ways that humans are like God is that we can also make things. Obviously, we can use our hands. We can make things, lots of different ways. But we can also make things with our words, like God was doing. God has been able to create, the Torah says that God's able to create the entire world that we live in just by talking. And we also have a lot of power to shape our world by talking and by the words that we use. Obviously, in an election year, it's a particularly important thing to think about and how we communicate with people that we disagree with, either because they're not on the same political side as us, or they are on the same political side as us, but like we think that they aren't enough, or that they're too much, or that their strategy is wrong, or whatever, or the different priorities. There are a lot of reasons in an election year to disagree with people, and that's fine. Disagreeing is an important part of being in a democracy. It's a very important part of Judaism. The Talmud, our sort of big compendium of rabbinic thought, is the rabbis arguing, which means that they were disagreeing. The rabbis didn't usually have the same opinion. If they did, it would be a shorter and more boring book. But you have to make sure that you are, I don't want to say being respectful, but you have to be being intentional with the words that you're using. There are some things that you might want to raise your voice about. There are some things that you might consider unacceptable. But you have to be careful about that. You just have to be intentional. And you have to decide, what are the things that I'm going to really not tolerate at all? What are the things that I'm going to discuss, and how am I going to have that discussion? Also keep in mind the relationship you have with that person. If it's a stranger who you see on the street, or a stranger who you're talking to online, almost maybe don't even bother. Like, it's just going to kind of get you all amped up, and you don't know this person, you don't have a relationship with them. Versus if it's like an acquaintance of yours or a family friend, that's different. And then it's also, maybe they're a close friend of yours, or maybe they're someone who you have to live with. And so you have to find ways to have these discussions without destroying that relationship that you have with them. Again, we're talking about, creation and positive things that we can do in the world, even if we're disagreeing. And then, of course, there's our family, or our best friends, or the people who we see or want to see all the time. You may have disagreements with them too, and that's okay. And again, it's just a matter of how you use your words to do that. But even outside of an election year, like, we are all always communicating with people and talking to people. I'm talking to you right now, of course. And I'm choosing the words that I want to use in order to build a relationship. And those are also what you should be doing when you're communicating with people, even outside of the election, even after the pandemic is over and we're all able to hang out with people again. You should keep in mind that the Torah says that God has given us a power similar to God's own, and God's able to create the entire earth. And while we may not be able to do that with our words, we can create our life, and we can create our community, and we can affect it very strongly. And we should be careful with that, with all that power. Like, what is it? With great power comes great responsibility, is Stan Lee, the writer of I think that's specifically a Spider-Man comic. Stan Lee, in fact, is Jewish, so more connections out there. So just take that lesson with you today, and next time you're communicating with someone, especially if you're feeling frustrated or disappointed or otherwise not happy with the communication, keep in mind your relationship with them, and that you want to keep that going as well. And just, our words have a lot of power, and be mindful in how you use that. So now, as always, we've got our Misha Berach song to put on to kind of meditate, reflect. If you know someone who's sick, whether of coronavirus or of something else, which could range all the way from maybe they just have another disease to maybe they are just very lonely, this is a good time to think about them. You can pray if that's what you want to do, but we're just it's a song about healing. So you can do that. You can even think about yourself, or you could focus on something else, just some quiet time. Okay, so thank you again for joining me. I hope you are happy and healthy and you are finding good ways to keep yourself occupied. If you want to chat about this Torah study or anything else at all, feel free to email me on the Jewish Life account. Thank you all for kind of bearing with me. I even feel this was a little bit of a rough recording for me, but Judaism's not a performance. I'm going to give you what I got, and hopefully I'll get back into the groove of doing these videos. And with that, thank you for joining me again. See you next week. Shabbat Shalom.